Hello students, my name is Dr. Alice Mani. I'll be imparting lessons on business law, course 306. I am the resource person for Mahatma Gandhi National Council of Rural Education. I will be imparting lessons on business law. This is part of the BBA Rural Management course. This course is divided into 4 units. You will have 16 modules covering the syllabus. The 4 modules will be: the first module is an introductory chapter. Second chapter is various acts. The third is Sale of Goods Act, and the fourth and last chapter is Consumer Protection Act 2019. We will cover the second unit, which is various acts. This unit will be covered in 5 modules. The first module will look at the introduction to government contracts and Article 299. The second module will cover e-contracts or electronic contracts. The third module will cover the various provident funds and gratuity. The fourth module will cover Food Safety and Standards Authority of India or FSSAI. The fifth and last module will cover the Goods and Services Tax or GST. This module is titled Government Contracts and Article 299. So let us go ahead and understand the topic in details. As already mentioned, this lesson is an introduction to government contracts and Article 299. It has been structured to cover 2 broad areas in the following way. First, I will introduce the meaning and importance of government contracts. Then we will learn the provisions of Article 299. Have you heard of these terms, government contracts and Article 299? Are you familiar with these terms? I don't think so. Do you want to know about these topics which have got relevance in our official and personal dealings? I am happy to share this information with you in this module. At the end of this lesson, you will get the required information about government contracts. You will also be given insights about Article 299. We will begin by understanding the meaning of government contracts. Let me ask you one question. Are you familiar with the term government contracts? Have you heard about it before? Let me tell you about government contracts. So I will start with explaining the features of government contracts. We know that there are 2 parties to a contract. Always remember that in a government contract, one party to the contract will be the government. It can be the central government, state government or union territory. This is the first feature of a government contract. For example, you know that in January 2019, Infosys Limited got the contract from Central Finance Ministry to develop a new taxpayer-friendly portal to file income tax returns. This project was rupees 4,200 crore project. In this contract, one party is Infosys company and the other party is Union Finance Ministry. Thus, it is a government contract. The second feature of a government contract is the open tenders invited from general public for government contracts. These open tenders are advertised in leading newspapers and government websites. This is aimed at reaching maximum people and those interested can send their quotations. In the screening process, the suitable quotations will be accepted. This ensures transparency of operation. In the above example I quoted, Central Finance Ministry has advertised in leading newspapers inviting quotations for this project. Many information technology companies applied and finally Infosys Limited got selected from the applicants. Thus, government contracts ensure transparency by giving maximum publicity and open quotations and tenders. The third feature of government contracts is that only eligible contractors can apply for them. What are the eligibility norms for government contractors? Do you know? Let me explain it for you. GST registration is compulsory, and past experience in a similar line of business or service will be an added attraction. The eligibility norms will be mentioned in the advertisement. Those who satisfy the same can only apply, and it varies from contract to contract. Now, after GST is implemented in our country in 2017, replacing the indirect tax system, all business units should code their GST number, and they have to use GST registration number in all formal communications. Hence, when they apply for any government contracts, the GST number should be quoted. Also, granting the quotation will be based on their past experience in similar line of business or service. The last and foremost feature of a government contract is that it cannot be an implied contract. It has to be a written document, signed and registered. We know that if it is an implied contract, it will not have any legal validity, because implied contracts are not based on any written or oral agreement between the parties. In a central government contract, the President of India has the executive power. If it is a state government or union territory contract, Governor of the state has the executive power. Government contracts are subject to audit. If the contracts are not written, signed and registered, it will not be accepted. Thus, a government contract will always be written and registered. The conditions for government contracts are mentioned in Article 299 of the Indian Constitution. That is the importance of Article 299. Government contracts have to comply with the terms and conditions laid down in Article 299. I will explain the importance of Article 299 in a while. Now, let me take you through the principles of government contracts. There are 5 principles to be followed. These are reasonableness and fairness, non-arbitrary manner, public interest, equity and contractual liability. Let us learn these principles in detail. The first principle is reasonableness and fairness. This principle emphasizes that the reason for entering or refusing a government contract should be reasonable and fair. The whims and fancies of the ruling party, political considerations, religious considerations, or recommendations cannot be the criteria for granting or refusing government contracts. For example, in the construction of flyovers, metro stations, roads, airports, dams, power stations, waste treatment plants, schools, colleges, universities, libraries, toilets, parks, auditoriums, thermal power plants, etc., we can see that government contracts are finalized based on reasonableness and fairness. The second principle is that the central or state governments cannot act in an arbitrary manner while granting or refusing government contracts. The actions for refusal or acceptance should conform to some standards or norms which are rational and non-discriminatory. For example, do you know that Andhra Pradesh is using blockchain technology to record land transactions and vehicle registrations at present? They are planning to cover the entire government services through blockchain. This ensures transparency and efficiency of operations. The third feature of government contracts is public interest. In simple terms, public interest must be of utmost priority in sanctioning government contracts. This is quite evident since the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. Government funds are being directed to arrange for vaccinations, oxygen cylinders, medical facilities, upgrading government hospitals for treating the affected, etc. The fourth principle is equality. This principle emphasizes the need for balanced development of all regions. Therefore, government funding must reduce inequalities between the rich and poor by ensuring balanced development of all regions. For example, when Reserve Bank of India gave licenses for new banks, they had some conditions. One condition is that new banks should open 25% of their branches in unbanked rural areas. That is, rural areas having a population of 9,999 as per the latest census 2011. The second condition of Reserve Bank of India in this regard, and which we can relate to equality principle, is that new banks should also give 40% of their loans and advances for priority sector lending like other scheduled commercial banks. These two conditions will help the rural sector in getting more bank branches and getting loans for agriculture, small and medium industries, education loans, etc. This will surely help in uplifting the living standards of the rural households. Thus, government will ensure that all their efforts and new initiatives will be to bring equality in the country and to help bridge the gap between haves and have-nots. The fifth and last principle is contractual liability. We have already learned that government contracts are executed by the President of India for central government projects and the respective governors for state governments or union territory projects. Neither President of India nor governors will not incur any personal liability on behalf of the contracts executed for the purpose of constitution. Now, let us look at the relationship between government contracts and Article 299. According to Article 299, three conditions must be satisfied to form a government contract. These three conditions are: first, the government contracts must be expressed by the President of India for central government projects and by state governors for state government or union territory projects. The second condition is that central government projects must be signed and executed by the President of India and by the respective state governors for state government or union territory contracts. Additionally, the contracts must be as per the Indian Contract Act 1872. I know that you have already learned that as per the Indian Contract Act 1872, 10 essential conditions are to be fulfilled to become a valid contract. The third condition is that the persons executing such contracts must be directed or authorized by the President of India for central government contracts and by the respective state governors for state government or union territory contracts. In this modern era, the promise of government to citizens, or for that matter even the non-citizens, are of great importance, especially in case where the government enters into a promise for a contractual or a business transaction. It becomes quite important to protect the interests of citizens when such persons with their earnest money invest with the government and later receives objection or cheating from the government, thereby not abiding by their promise. In such a situation, the individual's investment becomes ineffective, thereby leaving the person helpless. Thus, to deal with such a situation, the doctrine of promissory estoppel came into function. The Indian judiciary played a vital role in making the government responsible for its promise and further made accountable for the promises made by government. Now, let us look at the requirements of promissory estoppel. This term, promissory estoppel, is related to government contracts. Once Government of India or any state government or Union Territory Administration makes any promise to anyone, they cannot go back on their promise later. Thus, we should understand the features of promissory estoppel to know that the connection between government contracts and promissory estoppel. There are four principles. First principle is significant promise. Second, reliance on promise. Third, economic loss. And fourth, equity and fairness. If these four requirements are fulfilled, only then we are eligible to get protection as per the doctrine of promissory estoppel. But first, let us understand what is promissory estoppel. Have you heard this term before? Promissory estoppel is a doctrine in contract that stops a person from going back on his promise, even in the absence of a valid document between the parties. For example, if a factory owner announces additional wages for the workers if they work overtime, then even though there is no written and signed contract between the factory owner and workers, the owner has to pay extra wages for the workers who work overtime. The owner cannot go back on his promise. The requirements to get protection under doctrine of promissory estoppel are the following. First, the promisor makes a significant promise to make the promisee act on it. This is evaluated on the basis of how a normal person would act in a similar situation. The second requirement is that consideration is not needed to support this promise. Third requirement is that the promisee suffers economic loss by acting on the basis of the promise made by the promisor. The fourth requirement is that fulfillment of the promise is the only way to compensate the promisee. It is also known as the principle of equity and fairness. Let us learn more about the doctrine of promissory estoppel. The simple meaning is that if the government of India makes a promise to any person and the promise is not inconsistent with the law of the land and not against the public interest, then it cannot refuse to abide by its promise afterwards. For example, recently central government has announced a compensation for children who lost both their parents or guardians due to COVID death. This doctrine is commonly called as promissory estoppel or equitable estoppel or quasi estoppel or a new estoppel. It is a doctrine in contract law that stops a person from going back on the promise even in the absence of a legal valid contract between the parties. This is the first feature of doctrine of promissory estoppel. The second feature is that if the promisor is going back on his promise, the aggrieved party can recover damages from the promisor. The third and last feature is that the doctrine of promissory estoppel allows a contract to be enforced even without consideration. We know the importance of consideration as per the Indian Contract Act 1872. Consideration means something in return. Generally, in a contract, both the parties get some benefit. Moreover, the Indian Contract Act states that every promise must be supported with a consideration. But the doctrine of promissory estoppel allows that government contracts can be enforced even without consideration. The doctrine of promissory estoppel is a doctrine of equity. It makes a promise irrevocable when the acceptor accepts on the promise and irreversibly changes his position. The government can enter into a contract just like any other individual or entity. Today, state officials make promises to individual parties who enter into commitments on the basis of these promises, only to find that the government's discretion cannot be relied upon. The defense of statutory provisions provide sufficient reasons for the government to go back on the promises. Therefore, in this time of escalating administrative and executive problems faced by the state, the doctrine of promissory estoppel has gained considerable importance in the field of administrative law. This latest judgment gains particular significance in view of the present COVID-19 outbreak and all the schemes, relaxations, and exemptions being offered by the government for reviving the economy. The similarity between the circumstances in the above case and the present circumstances cannot be ignored. Several incentives and the fiscal exemptions are being extended by the government to business to aid the recovery of the economy and the businesses from the aftermath of the COVID-19 outbreak. These exemptions and incentives will certainly benefit the businesses to whom they are extended. However, any business which avails of these exemptions or benefits would be best served to keep in mind the possibility of the withdrawal of the said exemptions or benefits in the coming years. The best approach for businesses would be to plan for the future with cautious optimism and prepare for the eventuality of such a withdrawal. Such a situation may or may not arise in the future, but good, sound and cautious planning will protect these businesses from severe consequences if it does. Businesses would be wise to follow the policy of maintaining a continuous dialogue with the government as regards the efforts undertaken with regard to such incentives. Some other prudent measures may include quantifying and crystallizing the losses should the incentives be withdrawn abruptly. Indeed, in view of the above mentioned case, the best policy in these uncertain times is to hope for the best and plan for the worst. Our learning wouldn't be complete if we don't assess what we have learned. So, here is an activity for you. Would it be reasonable to proceed with the government contract if the principles of government contracts are not fulfilled? Explain why. Now that we have reached the end of this module. I hope you got a good insight about government contracts and Article 299. To conclude Module 4 of our video lesson, you know that this is Chapter 2 and the first module we have covered now. Chapter 2 is titled Various Acts. This act we have 5 lessons, 5 video lessons. The first one is Government Contracts and Article 299. The second video lesson is about the electronic contracts or e-contracts. The third video lesson is about the provident funds and gratuity. The fourth video lesson is about Food Safety and Standards Authority of India and the Employees Compensation Act 2010. The last video lesson of this chapter is Goods and Services Tax or GST. So now we have covered one video lesson of Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is titled Various Acts. The one video lesson we covered is Government Contracts and Article 299. So this is what I want to conclude with this video lesson. Until we meet again, goodbye and thank you.